to see the dysfunction. I continue to see the career politicians that are not serving us as citizens of this district. And meanwhile, we see instability all around the world because of all of the weakness and chaos. And so I'm here applying for a job. I've spent my life building jobs. I've spent my life hiring people, leading people, and I am here to apply for a job from each and every one of you. I'm on the other side of the table. And I've gone from, being in customer service my entire life, my wife and I, to I want to be public service, be my sole mission. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. We'll now go to Roger Roth.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. Thank you, WMC, for hosting this debate. It is a pleasure for me to be here, to be able to speak with all of you here this afternoon. It wasn't that long ago that I was standing outside those very windows, if you can see them in the back of the room, in some cold sleet and snow, shaking the hands of 2,500 people as they're waiting to come into this arena right here to meet President Trump. That was way back in the beginning of April. And I've had the privilege of meeting many of those people out on the campaign trail. So it comes all full circle. I am Roger Roth. I am running for Congress here in Northeast Wisconsin. I'm a 25-year home builder, worked in small business my entire life, even to this very day. 20-year member of the Wisconsin National Guard. I've had 4 deployments to the Middle East. I'm still serving as a captain in a fighter wing here in Wisconsin. I've also served in the state legislature with Governor Scott Walker, who is endorsing me in this race as the principled conservative who can go to Washington, work with President Trump, and get this country moving in the right direction. And when my time in public service was done, I came right back home, right back to home building, my small business, just as our founding fathers intended public service to be. For my wife and I can tell you that the thing that we're probably most proud of is our family. We're honored to have and humbled to have 5 little boys. We know that with that honor comes great responsibility, which is why my wife and I choose to homeschool our 5 boys. And we also instill in them Judeo-Christian values that we get at our local church just down the road in Appleton. And I can speak again for my wife and I, the greatest honor of our lifetime is that those 5 little boys, including the oldest who just turned 11, they still call us mommy and daddy. So I'm running for Congress because Washington is broken. We can look at the border, look at inflation, look at national security. The Biden-Harris administration has failed America. I am the candidate who has the experience, both in small business, in the military, and in the legislature, to go out to Washington and lead on day one. And I will go to the southern border. I mean, this is a catastrophe. I came back from there. We'll probably talk about this a little bit later. But I will go and work with Trump to get that wall built and that border secured. On inflation, look, my wife and I know how hard it is to put a budget together. Our 5 little boys go through 5 gallons of milk, 4 loaves of bread, 3 boxes of cereal, countless goldfish crackers and yogurt tubes and applesauce pouches. We can't get out of the grocery store most weeks for less than $300. We simply can't afford 4 more years of the Harris-Biden administration. And then on national security, I'm the one guy who's worn a uniform. I can speak to the challenges our war fighters are facing and be able to provide them leadership in Washington. And that's why I humbly ask for your vote on August 13th. Thank you.
Very good. Andre, last but not least.
Thank you, Kurt. It's an honor to be here today. So I am not the best looking up here. I don't have the biggest wallet, but I'm going to fight the hardest for you. I'm proud to be the proven conservative running for the 8th Congressional District. And I'm proud to have worked very closely with WMC on really getting Wisconsin's economy moving. Certainly on tort reform and civil justice. Very proud to be the U.S. Chamber Institute of Legal Reform's National Award winner for Trust Transparency, something that WMC was very instrumental in. I see our friends from the Wbay Chamber here in the room, honored to have received many awards from them for work on whether it's local infrastructure or just things that are critical for, again, making sure that we keep our local economy moving. But I was the committee chair when we made Wisconsin a right-to-work state. I was also the committee chair when we eliminated the state prevailing wage and did government contracting reform. I was also pleased to be the original Assembly co-author, the lead co-author of the manufacturing agriculture tax credit, which WMC has been the champion for ensuring remains here in the state of Wisconsin, driving our economic success. So certainly there have been a number of issues as well on workforce and reining in the administrative state that I very much appreciate WMC's support for, very much appreciate having this venue here today to be able to talk to all of you. But it is critical that we deal with the chaos at the southern border. It is an existential threat to our sovereignty. We have drugs and thugs streaming across, and I'm the clear choice for dealing with that problem. I'm proud to have been endorsed by a majority of the Republican sheriffs across the 8th Congressional District, and every law enforcement organization that's endorsed in this race, whether it's the Wisconsin Professional Police Association, Milwaukee Police Association, National Association of Police Organizations. And of course, inflation is driving, well, it's being driven by the runaway spending at the federal level. It's critical we get on top of that. We can't just continue to be passing continuing resolutions and raising the debt ceiling, or even talking about minting trillion-dollar coins every 100 days. We have to have somebody who's going to get serious about getting into state aid or federal agency budgets and cutting spending, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I really have been so thankful for the conversations that I've been able to have across the 8th Congressional District, and look forward to having a spirited discussion of the economic issues here today. Thank you.
Very good. Now we'll proceed to the question and answer portion of the debate, and we'll start with me talking about inflation and the cost of doing business in the United States and in the state of Wisconsin. Since January of 2021, inflation has increased by over 20%. This is a major concern for businesses and a top issue for voters as well. What are the best ways for the federal government to combat high inflation? Andre, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, as I just had stated in my opening statement, inflation is being driven by the runaway spending, and certainly then we see state spending as well. I think during COVID, we saw not only the massive expansion of the welfare state and everything that's driving spending there, but ultimately, again, we have to look at cuts agency-wide across all federal agencies. And we saw any number of disruptions under COVID as well with supply chains. I think it's important that we promote domestic supply chains as well. But that really is one of the keys and one of the things that while in 2018 we were able to restrain the administrative state through sue and settle and guidance document reform, we also should have taken legislative control of federal spending. And I think at the, well, we've seen the results of Tony Evers jetting around the state of Wisconsin with golf tournament-sized checks and basically buying votes. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen the same thing at the federal level. I think it's critical that we basically stop the spending rather than continuing resolutions that put us on that trajectory of unsustainable spending. It's critical that we actually do zero-based budgeting, do single-subject spending bills, and quit some of this omnibus appropriations where we only look at how much spending we're going to add to what we've already been doing. We can't incrementally keep adding to spending. We have to get into the base budgets and cut.
Tony, you have 2 minutes. Same question.
Well, inflation is a tax. And, career politicians, as much as they want more revenue and they want to continue to spend, they're not willing to politically raise tax rates. So what they do is they continue to spend recklessly and spend our money without any care in the world. And ultimately, we are running at a deficit right now of this year of probably $3 trillion. Every 100 days, we're going further into debt, $1 trillion. And our Federal Reserve at this point is literally printing or inserting $80,000 into our currency every single second. So your dollar is worth less as we continue to spend. That's why we continue to have this massive inflation. So to cut inflation, one is we need to rein in spending. And for me, I think we should do exactly what I did in my business. In order to be successful and to stay afloat, I had to go through my budget line by line. I had to find inefficiencies, I had to find rate increases or any sort of increase that came, and I had to attack that problem right then and there. And that's why I'm a proponent of single subject spending bills. And I will fight hard to make sure that we do that, which means as one of the things that we do in the House of Representatives is we create spending bills. We initiate them, and they should be single. And so that way, when a bill comes through, once presented, we vote on that bill separately. And we can have vigorous debate about it and decide if that's something that we truly need. And single subject spending bills are exactly what we need. The other way to do it is to continue with President Trump's tax cuts. Those are set to expire in 2025. We cannot have the taxes continue to go up. The other way to battle this is truly energy. I was endorsed by the Oil and Gas Workers Association. I was a gas station owner, and we had a chain. And energy is one way that we can battle this. President Trump talks about it a lot. And as the Trump-endorsed conservative, I am passionate about energy dominance in our country. We need to pull back regulations. We need to open up those land leases, and that's exactly how we can get our economy booming again.
Roger.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually delighted that it's been a very rocky couple of weeks here just in politics in the United States with everything that's going on. And now we're left with a new presidential candidate, so it appears, on the Democratic side, Kamala Harris. I actually think it's really good for Republicans because it makes, again, the race here in 2024 a referendum on 4 years under Donald Trump and a referendum under 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration. So having her as a standard bearer is so important because the day that Trump left office, the inflation rate here in America was 1.7%. And as you heard in the opening remarks, the prelude to this question, it skyrocketed over 20%. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, these are real issues that hardworking Wisconsin families and small businesses like mine have to face each and every day as we try to make sure that we can provide not only for our businesses but for our families. And I think the result of this, it's pretty clear. It's the reckless spending in Washington is what has driven the inflation here in our country. And these politicians thought for too long that they could spend whatever they want and it wouldn't have an effect. But at the end of the day, you can't violate the laws of economics. I think the first thing that we can do out in Washington is to pull back the unspent ARPA dollars and the Unspent Inflation Reduction Act monies. These are monies that have been allocated but haven't been spent yet. Let's pull those out, particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act, which was supposed to go and provide for infrastructure investment in our country, and it's done nothing more than drive the wish list, the green energy wish list of the Dem Progressive Party. But pull those back, and then at the end of the day, you need men and women in Washington who are committed to holding the line on spending. I am that person. That is what I've done in my time in the legislature with Scott Walker, which is why he's endorsing me, and that's what I'll do as your next congressman.
Related to that are interest rates, and interest rates are particularly high, and they're having a negative impact on businesses, particularly small businesses. Is having a major barrier to investing in new equipment, facilities, or expansion, which means it's stunting the growth of Wisconsin businesses. What do you believe is the best remedy to lower interest rates for both businesses and consumers? And we'll go with Tony. You get this one first.
Well, interest rates, I hear from business owners all around, is interest rates are too high and there's not access to capital right now with businesses, and that is a big concern. Having, being the only one in this race that has run a business for almost 30 years, I know how difficult it is from a lending perspective and, the ability to access capital and at a decent interest rate. And so that's a big concern that is right now. Ultimately, I think right now we need to audit the Federal Reserve. I think we need to understand exactly what's going on with the Federal Reserve. We need to find out why they're doing what they do. But ultimately, it comes down to reining in spending. Right now we are at such a deficit in our government. We continue to spend money that we don't have. And I think, career politicians are beholden to their donors, and because donors are who continues to keep the career politicians in office. And that once you take money from these big donors, you then have to follow whatever they tell you to do. And I think that's where the reckless spending continues to happen. And ultimately, inflation is a tax. And, so from an interest perspective, we also need to look at, the Federal Reserve was put into place in the early 1900s. And during the Nixon administration, we came off the gold standard. And now we're a fiat currency. And again, I think we need to dial in exactly what's going on at the Federal Reserve and really understand why they continue to print money, why they continue to use these debt instruments and put us into more debt. And ultimately, we need to keep interest rates low because that's what businesses require, and that will allow us to have a good economy and allow our businesses to prosper.
Very good. Roger, same question, interest rates.
Yeah, well, it's pretty clear. Kamala Harris and Democrats in Washington have destroyed this economy for hardworking, blue-collar, middle-class people here in Northeast Wisconsin. And I can tell you that as a home builder, how hard it is when I'm going out there and working with customers who are trying to make the most expensive purchase they will ever make in their life, and it's their house. It's trying to buy that version of the American dream, and they find that they're priced out of it, or priced into a smaller and smaller footprint of a home because of these ever-increasing interest rates. So on the mortgage side, the mortgage lending side, when Trump left office, it wasn't unheard of for people here in Northeast Wisconsin to be able to secure a 30-year loan for 2 3/4%. And right now, you'd be hard-pressed to find something around 7%. And it's making home affordability all but impossible for first-time home buyers and those who are working with their hands, the bread and butter of the economy here in Northeast Wisconsin. And it's all driven by reckless spending out in Washington. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it is. You know, the government has to be able to sell treasury bills to fund the government. And we saw under Donald Trump, a lot of comparison here, but when he left office, the T-bill was just under 1% at 0.9, and now it is over 4%, all driven by reckless spending in Washington. So if we want to bring down interest rates, we've got to control the spending. The difficulty we have right now in America is that for the first time since the World War II era, we have our debt to GDP ratio is over 100%. There wasn't a time not that long ago when we would look at countries in Europe who are doing the same thing and tell them that they needed to bring about financial austerity to get their economies in order. Well, it's time we in America take that medicine. We've got to get our fiscal house in order, and it all comes down to being able to control that spending.
Andre?
So rather than go for the full 2 minutes, let me just simplify it, because I already addressed this in the previous question over inflation. Obviously, inflation is driving interest rates. Federal spending, we have to starve the beast. The beast is government. We have to stop printing money. We have to actually hold the federal government, like we do at the state level, to a budget. And we need to end the Federal Reserve because, frankly, it's been encouraging risky and basically bailing out leftist social engineering. So that's my answer. Thank you.
First of all, gentlemen, thanks to each one of you for your willingness to run. The administrative state is imposing regulations on businesses and consumers that cost families far more than they can afford. A new study found that federal regulations cost the average family more than $14,000 per year, and small manufacturers, which are the backbone of Wisconsin's economy, pay more than $50,000 per employee per year just to comply with the cost of federal regulations. Wisconsin manufacturers can't remain competitive in a global marketplace with those enormous costs. If elected, talk about what you would do to stop unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats from imposing these economically ruinous policies on our families and job creators. And Roger, we'll start with you.
Scott, I appreciate that question. And I think it gets to the crux of what's really happening in Washington. And that's why we think that the politicians out there are in control. And the sad reality is that it's the unelected bureaucrats that oftentimes wield the most power. I feel this as a home builder here in Northeast Wisconsin, building houses for people. I know how regulations can hurt our industry and how they can drive up costs for the consumer. The latest report that I had seen, now this was before Biden's 20% inflation spike, but just on the cost of a new home, government regulation added over $90,000. Just think about that. The government adding cost to a home, and again, pricing people out of home affordability. So what we need in Washington is exactly what we were able to do here in Wisconsin. I was so fed up just with the overregulation that I put down my tool belt, went down to the state Senate in 2014 with Governor Scott Walker, and we got the administrative state here in Wisconsin under control. We passed a thing called the REINS Act. And what it basically said was, because the way it works now is you've got these agencies with unelected people in them who are making rules, promulgating rules that have the weight of law, and no one has to vote on it. And politicians love it because they can come back to you and say, yeah, I never took a vote, it was that agency over there. In Wisconsin, we made it so that the legislature, by passive review, could object to any one of those rules. We need to do the same thing at the federal level, because if we don't do it, just the EPA, for instance, came out with new efficiency standards in home building that we haven't even quantified the cost on yet, but will again increase more than that $90,000, the cost of a home, and no politician had to vote on it. It's time we made people that we elect to Washington take the tough votes. We can do that by passing a federal REINS Act.
Senator Jacques.
Well, I really appreciate this question. I was excited by the Supreme Court Chevron deference decision, and it's actually just this week that I signed a letter to OSHA in public comment, because they're basically looking to shut down our volunteer fire departments with really overly burdensome and costly regulations. But we need to ultimately reduce the size and scope of the federal government. That includes reducing federal employee headcount. As I mentioned earlier about guidance documents and sue and settle, that was basically documents that you and I never get to see, that were given the force of law, that never even went through the rulemaking process, much less had any statutory authorization, and unfortunately were being used against businesses and individuals throughout our state. That was critical that we got that in place before Governor Evers took over. Sue and settle, that's basically where you have Dane County Circuit Court decisions ported into statute, where you have settlements between leftist special interests, and we certainly saw it quite a bit during the Doyle administration, where new powers were granted without any statutory authorization whatsoever. So those are certainly things that we have to look at doing the same thing at the federal level. But we do have the Congressional Review Act, where we can toss out some of these burdensome regulations. Obviously, it hasn't really been used, but I'm a huge supporter of the REINS Act, not only a co-author of getting it done in Madison, but I actually introduced by myself a resolution calling for the federal REINS Act to be enacted and putting that forward amongst my colleagues. So thank you very much.
Tony Weed.
So as the only candidate in this race that is endorsed by President Trump, and like President Trump, I ran my own business for 30 years, and I felt the effects of all of the regulations in my business, and my vendor partners would talk about it as well. It absolutely restricted us, and it was definitely a burdensome for us. And, you know, I would definitely support the REINS Act. I think that is a step in the right direction where Congress has control over that. That act basically is, if there's any major rule in an agency, that has to be approved by the House and also the Senate. I also think our bureaucracy is way too big. We should have 3 branches of government, and right now I think we have 4 branches of government. The agency state. And our federal government is the largest employer in the world. We have over 3 million employees that work for the federal government. And that's not to mention all the federal contractors that work for our government. That could be 12, 13 million people in addition to that 3 million people. And so our agencies are completely bloated. They need to be audited, each and every one of them, and they need to have accountability right now. I think we can cut each of them and cut spending in half, and maybe even more. There's agencies that we have right now that I think we can completely eliminate. You know, agencies like the Department of Education, and we need to look at the EPA and really truly dig in and find out exactly what's going on. I had a conversation with Governor Doug Burgum, who was the governor of North Dakota. And he talked about during President Trump's administration, oil and energy was open for business, and he could actually do business. The oil industry was exploring, and we were doing what we needed to do to harvest the minerals in North Dakota. Once President Biden came into office, it was shut down. The regulations came, and they have had a really, really difficult time. That's why it's important we have President Trump in office to rein in these regulations. I will be a fighter to allow for fair markets. I will promote good business and make sure we have good free markets for our businesses.
Senator Jacques, this question will go to you first. We're facing unprecedented levels of illegal immigrants at our southern border, which has led many to push for stronger border security. At the same time, employers are consistently faced with labor shortages. In WMC's 2024, this summer's Wisconsin Employer Survey, nearly 70% of employers say that they're struggling to find workers. What solutions do you support to address the crisis at the border and fix the broken immigration system?
So I think that it's important that we critically address the crisis at the southern border without tying that strictly to workforce, because workforce is a very significant issue. I think that, the work I've done on youth apprenticeship and connecting those in our military, those with disabilities, and eliminating benefit cliffs in a number of areas are certainly very important. But when it comes to public safety, homeland security, the Remain in Mexico policy is something that I would support, putting on a statutory basis, not just leaving it to the whims of whoever is president at any given time. I think it's critical that we have a process that shows that our rules are going to be followed, especially for criminal illegals, that we give those tools to law enforcement. We absolutely need to build the wall. I think that there's just too many things that unfortunately have not been done to address the crisis at the southern border. Obviously, under borders are Kamala Harris. So, I think we certainly want to allow for those that have skills to be able to be brought into our workforce. I've done a lot of work when we've talked about reciprocal licensing, and again, anything that's upskilling our workforce, and certainly we have a visa process that works, but I think we cannot turn a blind eye to those who choose not to follow the rules, because we are a nation of laws, and that sends absolutely the wrong message when we choose not to enforce the laws of our country.
Mr. Weed?
So as the Trump-endorsed conservative in this race, I am aligned with President Trump on fixing the border issues. We saw the success that we had during the 4 years of President Trump's administration. We need to build the border wall. We need to get that done and build a perimeter around that wall. And also the Remain in Mexico policy that President Trump put into place was effective. We saw a 90% reduction in border crossings from illegal immigrants. That policy basically doesn't allow for people to cross the border and then apply for asylum. The policy would make people apply for asylum in their country of origin. In addition, we need to fund Border Patrol effectively and provide the leadership so that the border is completely shut down. As it relates to people in workforce and things like that, I dealt with that in my business, having been in business for almost 30 years. It was a very difficult thing to hire, especially after the COVID crisis. It got to be even more difficult. And so I think, one thing we need to do is have unemployment reform. We need to incentivize folks to get out and work, those that are sitting on the sidelines to get out and work. And there needs to be something done from an unemployment standpoint. But a real world thing to think about is we need to make trades a good thing. We need to promote that. And leaders like me in Congress need, as I'm going around and talking to children in schools, and talk about the trades. It's a great career. And make it okay for folks to say, hey, look, I'm not going to college, because college isn't for everybody. But say, hey, look, I want to be an electrician. I want to be a plumber. I want to get into welding, or, I was at a business just the other day. They're in the gear business. A young man's coming over and working from high school. He's working during the day. And he wants to get into the gear business. And I think that's great. We need to encourage folks to choose the trades and to help our businesses right here in District 8. We have a lot of manufacturing that's going on. And I also talk to folks in the agriculture industry. We need to find immigration reform. We need to find ways for those folks to hire people using a good immigration process.
Senator Ross, same question to you.
Yes, thank you. I'm the candidate here who actually went to the southern border. And I had an opportunity to meet with high-level former Trump administration officials in both ICE and Department of Homeland Security. I had those briefings, met with local border agents, local law enforcement, and was able to get an understanding you just can't get. It's 1,000 times worse than anything that you'll see if you turn on Fox News or another cable station. What is happening down there is a catastrophe, a human catastrophe. And we call it an immigration crisis. Truth be told, this is human trafficking. Nothing crosses that border that the cartel doesn't have their hands on. in the money that they charge these people, between $8,000 and $15,000 to be muled across here in the United States. These people don't have that. And many of them, particularly the women, find themselves in the sex trade here in the United States. And as a government, we let this happen. We're letting this happen right now. And what we need is a fighter who will go out there and work with Trump and solve this once and for all. I'm the guy that will do it. And I can tell you, the way immigration, the reason it's always failed in the past is that they've tried to come up with these grand compromises. No, we're going to seal and secure the southern border. That's where it starts. I'm in the military. I've got self-aid and buddy care. They don't train me to save a life on a battlefield. They train me to apply pressure so that a medic can come through and do the job. And the same is true with our immigration problem here. We've got to apply the tourniquet, got to apply the pressure, secure that southern border, turn back Donald Trump's policies, but not by executive order, pass them in statute so that another administration can't get rid of them, finish construction of that wall, and allow those border agents who are currently, 20,000 of them, in offices pushing paperwork, allow them back on the border doing their jobs, protecting us and keeping us safe.
So speaking of the labor force, the national labor force participation rate is currently about 62%, which is almost 5 points lower than at the high of over 67% in early 2000. While Wisconsin's labor force participation rate is higher than the national rate at about 65%, we still have many individuals not in the workforce. What policies would you pursue to increase the labor force participation rate and encourage more people into the workforce? And Mr. Weed, you'll start on this one.
Well, this is a great question. There's folks that are sitting on the sidelines and not working, and I felt this in running my business for almost 30 years. And, you know, it was very challenging to find people that were qualified, to hire and actually wanted to come to work. And time again, folks would come to work and then they would, all of a sudden, they would ghost. They would not be around anymore. And so for me, I think we need to find unemployment reform to some degree, and we need to dig into that and understand why people are not working. And that is truly where I think where it lies right now. People are obviously feeling that they can work for a little bit and then they can go back home and they continue to get benefits. But we've turned into a welfare state as a country. You know, this country has turned into where we are just giving benefits out, left and right, and people are just continuing to stay on those benefits. This is happening, and we're now in the second generation, and it's going to be close to the third generation where folks are, learning the system and they're not incentivized to work. So we have to dig into this, and we have to find some sort of solution to this to make sure that people are incentivized.
Senator Roth?
Can you just repeat the question for me?
Absolutely. What policies would you pursue to increase the labor force participation rate and encourage people back into the workforce?
Yeah, thank you. And I remember the statistics that you mentioned, and those are very accurate. And I just want to throw in one thing to the last question I didn't have time to answer when you mentioned with workforce on the immigration issue. One of the things we can do kind of fits in this too, but let's not try and find federal solutions to everything. Let's trust the states. And that's what I've learned in my time both in small business and in the legislature. Let's trust the states here to handle some of these issues. Senator Ron Johnson had a proposal to allow the states to manage the H-1B visa program because he understood, I think as many of us do, that we're better in tune to what the needs are of employers in our state than some government bureaucrat in Washington. So I think that's an idea whose time has come. And then we've got to get people back to work. We've got to incentivize work again. And every time government comes out with a solution to a problem, it disincentivizes people from working. So if you look at Obamacare, for instance, they incentivize people. They base the tax credits you receive. It's based on your income. Maybe we could switch that and base it on age instead. But what it does is it just forces people, and I talk to individuals who sell this insurance, and people come in and they're looking just for what they can get so that they don't go over. And we need to encourage people to get out there and actually work again. And you're seeing it, I think, at all levels. We've got, if you looked at what happened on our college campuses, this idea right now that we're going to forgive student loan debt, this is just ridiculous, and it's only going to drive and exacerbate the problem. We need people to work again. It's something I learned at a very young age. I never got a day off. I never got a weekend, holidays. I was out there working with my dad, swinging a hammer, and we've got to incentivize people doing that again. It's how you live the American dream. It's how you grow and make a better life for yourself and for your family.
Senator Jacques, same question to you.
So my wife and I have 7 kids, so we're trying to grow that workforce. You know I spoke a little bit before about the military, making sure that we are trying to attract folks back here who have that skill and experience. Very honored to have passed the Heroes for Healthcare legislation that's directly getting military corpsmen into our healthcare fields here in Wisconsin. Also was the author of eliminating the tax on active duty military pay. And when we talk about not disincentivizing work, part of that discussion has to be reforming our tax code so that we're not taking as much out of people's paychecks and instead just giving them benefits. You know, I have addressed benefit cliffs, like through the MAP program. Again, Green Bay Chamber came to me with some great legislation in terms of expanding the youth apprenticeship program to all career clusters, so that when we have high school students that are interested in any field, particularly in business, that they're not turned away or looking at going to another state to further their education. We have those opportunities and can plug them in right here. So I think those are really the keys when it comes to workforce. And again, very pleased to partner with WMC in that effort.
The United States has massive reserves of secure, affordable, and reliable fossil fuel energy. Our country is the global leader in both oil and natural gas production. Yet the current administration has pledged to end our use of fossil fuels and transition to energy sources that are much less reliable and that are sourced primarily from our geopolitical enemies like China. These policies would impose massive new energy costs on Wisconsin manufacturers. Please explain your position on energy policy, and in particular, what you would do different than the current administration. And the question goes first to you, Roger.
Yeah, well, I think the short answer is everything. I would do everything different than the current administration. We've got a current, think about this now, we've got a current administration, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, that is allowing Iran to sell their oil on the open market, but they're sanctioning Alaskan oil. I mean, that's the net effect of what they're doing right now. I talked to manufacturers all over northeast Wisconsin and just toured a few up here in Brown County where their monthly electric bill is over $1 million a month. A month, if you can imagine that. And when you look at just under the Biden-Harris presidency here, electric rates here in Wisconsin increased over 25%. You can imagine how much of a hole in a budget that would leave them. We've got to have an American-first outlook here on energy production. And the truth is we can do it. We've got it. We've got the oil reserves here in our country. We've got the natural gas, largest natural gas reserves in the world. We have it here. The only thing we lack right now is a will on the part of our government. I will go to Washington and stand up for our energy sector here, just as I've done. We're going to get the Keystone Pipeline open and functioning again. We're going to get the Line 5 here in northern Wisconsin completed and functioning again. These are ways that we can bring down energy rates here, not just for consumers, but for businesses as well. And we've got to get away from this idea, EV, and we'll talk about this maybe, but there might be a day, and there will at some point, for electric vehicles, but the push we have to them right now is creating a problem just in baseload capacity here. We've got to be building more baseload electric facilities that run on natural gas, clean coal, nuclear. And so everything, I would do everything different than the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden administration.
Andre?
Well, you know, our rates here in Wisconsin are some of the highest in the Midwest. And what's driving that? I mean, unfortunately, mandates. We have also harmful government subsidies. I mean, especially with wind. Just ridiculous. It's the Green New Deal light. So yeah, we need to drill, baby, drill. but we also need nuclear energy. I'm very proud to have nuclear plants in my district, but one of them had to shut down in part because of onerous federal regulations. So we know that the loss of baseload power is causing an energy crisis. It is going to cause any number of problems for businesses like the Wapaka Foundry that need a large amount of reliable energy that once those get taken off the grid, the cost of putting something like natural gas on the grid, and especially unreliable sources of energy, that's a huge issue. I am a big supporter of the pipelines that we're trying to build across the state, and yeah, I think it's going to come down to regulation and really deregulation, and again, unleashing the power that we had under President Trump in terms of exploring our domestic energy sources. So, thank you.
And Mr. Wheat.
Well, as the Trump-endorsed conservative in this race, I completely support President Trump in his efforts to make us an energy-dominant country. We need to focus on this. Look, one economically, and two, national security-wise. We need to focus on liquid fuels. Liquid fuels being gas and oil, and also biodiesel and ethanol, and all of the liquid fuels that are required in order for us to function properly. And we need to cut the regulations. Look, like I said before, working with Governor Burgum and understanding what it's like to be a governor in North Dakota, a very rich oil state. He saw the dramatic effects of all of the regulations that came from the Biden administration. Biden administration shut down the Keystone Pipeline. They stopped us from and prevented us from leasing and oil and gas in certain areas. That all needs to stop. We need to be energy independent. One, it will absolutely help our economy, because we need to have lower prices. The more energy independent we are, the lower the prices of gasoline are. There goes inflation, and that will absolutely help businesses. But also from a national security perspective, we cannot be beholden to all of our adversaries around the world. This is something that should be simple. It's something that I am very passionate about, having been in the industry of selling gasoline in our gas stations around this district. And I see the effects of rising gas prices. We're seeing 60% increases right now because of these initiatives like the Green New Deal. I'm not going to be interested, and I will not support subsidizing electric vehicles and any of the Green New Deal type things. We cannot spend money on that. We need to focus on liquid fuels. We need to be energy dominant. And with President Trump, and I will be aligned with President Trump and stand right next to him and make sure that that is our focus.
Less than 1% of all cars, trucks, and SUVs in Wisconsin are electric vehicles. Yet the current administration has proposed a new rule that basically requires about 70% of all new vehicles to be electric vehicles 8 years from now. Do you support this rule, and do you believe that it is the appropriate role of the federal government to dictate to consumers what type of vehicle they have to purchase? And the question will go first to Andre.
Yeah, I've actually signed a letter to Congress, or to the administration against that. So I think there were probably about a dozen of us that did so, but I very strongly am against that mandate. Thank you.
Mr. Weed?
If people want to have an electric vehicle, they should have the right to buy one. Our government shouldn't be making or forcing people to use electric vehicles, and we shouldn't be subsidizing electric vehicles. We're frivolous. We talk about spending and wasteful spending at the federal government. We're spending billions and billions of dollars to build electric vehicle charging stations, and they're not even being built, and they're not even being used. It costs about $3 million to $4 million to build a convenience store, and let the market decide. I think people should have the right to do that, but the government should not be telling us what to do. The government should stay out of our way, let the market decide, let the people decide, and they're going to decide that liquid fuels and gasoline and biodiesel and diesel is the cheapest, most efficient way, and that's what hardworking families want. They cannot afford to be doing anything that they don't want to do. They want the cheapest, most efficient way, and they want to be able to travel a long distance with their vehicle. So the government needs to get out of the way, and I will work hard in Congress to make sure that we don't have any legislation that subsidizes or funds EV.
Senator Roth.
Yeah, your questioning gets at the crux of what we talked about earlier with regulatory reform and why it's so important that we need a REINS Act out in Washington, a federal version of that, because the EPA without any legislator, any congressman or senator having to take a vote, is literally going to upend the transportation infrastructure network here in the United States by 2032. And no one voted on it. And we just can't allow that to happen. So I would strongly, I mean, I'm against that. I would strongly, I think the REINS Act, make a proponent for that and get that peeled back. But then when you look at like the future of EV, I don't know what Democrats like Kamala Harris are so afraid of. Because if the technology works, consumers will adapt to it. In the home building industry, we kind of had a revolution back when I was a little kid. In the 1990s, when battery-operated tools first came on the marketplace. And I remember when my brothers and I saved up money to buy my father a 12-volt Milwaukee drill, cordless drill. And we thought it was the coolest thing. You didn't have to plug an extension cord in. The thing was a piece of crap. Didn't charge well, didn't hold a charge well. But the marketplace on its own, there were no tax credits given to my brothers and I to buy that. On its own, the marketplace developed to where if I took you on a job site today, you likely wouldn't see an extension cord. Everything now, in Milwaukee, by the way, makes phenomenal electric tools, but everything right now is done cordless, and it was all done without government intervention, just by the free market place making those changes and giving consumers the kind of products they demanded. So I will always stand for the free market. I will always fight government regulation, and we'll make sure that we're protecting Wisconsin consumers here when it comes to the vehicles they can drive.
Let's go on to taxes. The 2017 tax Ryan tax reforms lowered the U.S. corporate rate from 35 to 21%, which is just below the global average, but still 84th highest in the world. Many of the Trump-Ryan reforms expire at the end of next year, including cuts to the individual rate, which approximately 90% of Wisconsin businesses who are pass-through entities are subject to. The Biden administration is on record supporting raising the corporate rate to 28%, while Trump supports lowering it to as potentially low as 15%. What do you believe the federal corporate rate should be, and do you support making permanent the 2017 Trump-Ryan personal income tax rates? Tony, we'll start with you.
Well, I am in agreement with President Trump, and we need to extend and make permanent those tax cuts. I will never support any sort of tax cut to anybody. And I think we need to lower the corporate tax rate. We need to let businesses get back to business. And I saw that in running my business. We were taxed at such a high rate. You know, when I would look at it, and I would tell my kids this, you know, if you made $100, you pretty much only made about 50. By the time you paid your federal taxes and all of the other taxes that come along with owning a business, you basically had about $50 left at the end of it. You know, that includes the local taxes, the sales taxes, all the different things. So I'm always going to be in favor of lowering taxes, definitely for businesses, because we need to allow businesses to succeed. That is the driver of our economy. But right now what's happening is I think career politicians and career bureaucrats, you know, career bureaucrats are the people that never leave Washington, and they're really the ones that are running the show right now with all of the agencies. But they continue to spend recklessly, and again, I think our tax right now, the increase in tax is from inflation, and that's from the overspending. That's from the frivolous, you know, but they don't have a budget. There is no budget in Washington right now. It's not run like a business, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. I am here to protect the American dream, you know, the dream that allowed my wife and I to raise 4 children, and now that they're all in college. And I want our children to have the same benefits that we did living in America. And we need to reduce taxes. We need to allow people to live their life, create jobs, just like I did for almost 30 years.
Roger?
Yeah, thank you. When it comes to helping out businesses, taxes and regulation, this is like the bread and butter of it. When we want to make American companies competitive with those around the world, this is how we do it, by tax and regulatory reform. One of the only things, and you know, I tell people this on the campaign trail, very disappointed with the Congress in 2016 that went out there with a Republican president, and the only thing they could walk away with were the Trump tax cuts, very important as though they were. But I mentioned that to you is, I am a conservative you can trust to go out to Washington to work with President Trump to do more. We are going to do more than just extend the 2017 Trump tax cuts, but we absolutely will do that. Kamala Harris and the Democrats are openly campaigning on raising taxes. I don't know the last time we had people running for office saying we're going to raise your taxes. That is what's at stake here in the 2024 election. And you've got me, a principled conservative, as I mentioned, endorsed by Governor Scott Walker, is the conservative to go to Washington and work with Trump to turn this country around. My entire career has been cutting taxes. Worked with Governor Walker to cut taxes $8.5 billion. Also worked with WNC, incidentally, to pass or to author the first elimination of the state income tax in Wisconsin. We weren't able to get that passed with Tony Evers in the governor's mansion, but it's just indicative when you look at where growth is nationwide, it's in the states that don't have income taxes. When you look at where growth is around the world, it's in nations that have lower taxation. And that's why a corporate tax rate, I would support at 15%. It's nothing more. It's going to be passed on to the consumer anyway. It's a tax that goes on to the consumer. So let's make our businesses competitive by reducing burdensome regulations and taxation.
Andre.
Yeah, taxation is theft. I was the first candidate by far in this race to take the Americans for Tax Reform pledge to fight against any and all efforts to increase taxes. I know I talked about the MAC earlier, but the Manufacturing and Agriculture Tax Credit, the author, Senator Glenn Grothman at the time, Rachel was in his office, now Congressman Glenn Grothman endorsed me earlier today, but I was proud to be the lead assembly co-author of that legislation, which we were able to adopt. I was an original co-author of eliminating the personal property tax. And so any opportunity that we have to lower taxes, I'm going to be the guy that's agitating with the establishment to make sure that we get there, as opposed to taking whatever the establishment is going to give us anyways. And I think, yes, we need to stop the expiration of the Trump tax cuts. Certainly on the corporate income tax reduction, we need to keep that in place. But what Ron Johnson really got for everybody, and it's just critical, is that deduction on pass-through entities, which is what hits many more people. That's actually, I think, probably even the more impactful of the two provisions there. But they both certainly need to happen as a very basic starting point. And then again, you know, we need to cut taxes and we need to reduce government spending. Thank you.
Senator Roth, this question will start with you.
Yeah.
Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the Chevron doctrine, which for decades required courts to defer to unelected agency officials' interpretation of unclear statutes when crafting regulations that greatly impact businesses. The 6-3 decision returns lawmaking to elected officials in Congress. But critics of the decision say that Congress is too dysfunctional to pass detailed laws to direct agencies what to do. What will you do in Congress to ensure that elected officials, not unelected bureaucrats, draft our nation's laws and regulations?
Yeah, appreciate the question. I only chuckled at the beginning because one of your audience members came up to me and said they hoped, I don't know if that's the reason you asked that question, but no, it was a very impactful, probably one of the most impactful decisions of the last Supreme Court, of this latest round in the Supreme Court. And I certainly do support that. And I think it all ties into what I've been talking about this afternoon, about taking power away from the administrative state in holding your elected officials accountable. And with the Chevron deference in there before, basically what it meant was that when there was ambiguity, when there wasn't clarity, they just deferred to the agencies. And that gave an immense amount of power away, robbed it from the legislature and gave it to the administrative state. The answer is we have to write better laws. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I think it was too easy for legislators out in Washington, just quite honestly, to be lazy. But it's time that we write better laws, and I think we write better laws when we send better men and women out to Washington, which is why I think it's so very important that in this particular case, we send someone out there from the 8th District that has a complete set of experience, that can go to Washington, work with President Trump, move this country in the right direction. I've got the small business home building experience. I've got the 20 years in the military, still serving in the National Guard here in Wisconsin, and I served with Governor Scott Walker in the legislature. I will go out there and make sure that that House Republican conference does its job for you, the American people, by making sure that when we're passing these laws, we're very clear in what the intent of Congress is, so that when these cases, if they are adjudicated, they don't have to wonder where we were on it. They will be able to plainly read it within the law.
Senator Jacques, same question to you.
Yeah, I can't wait to get to work after that court decision. I don't know that there is any legislator that has done more in taking on the administrative state and excessive regulation than I have. And really, from my first session in the legislature, one of the first bills I passed was basically something where a state agency was choosing to interpret the word "and" as if it were the word "or," in order to basically impose an additional $500,000 in costs on a Wisconsin-based food processor that had no impact whatsoever on product safety, but it was going to cost them extra $500,000 to start up a production line in Wisconsin versus Michigan or Illinois, where they were offering them free land. I was the one that offered passed a law that for ATV and UTV ordinances in towns, you had the DNR saying in one town you were going to need to put up 20 signs. And another town, you were going to need to put up 400 signs. And it was unwilling to even enforce within its agency what the correct interpretation was, which was 20. We required an actual law for that. The same thing with, whether it was for egg sales at farmers markets or, well, there was the duck race legislation. There are countless examples. When I talked about guidance documents before, the guidance document in question that really started my journey was something that had been published only once back in 1984 that existed only in the basement in a file cabinet in Madison for Wisconsin Department of Transportation on how they wanted to interpret one line of statute. And they were going to use it to shut down Pumpkin Fest in Michigan. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. But there are so many examples where we need to rein in the administrative state. And again, very pleased that WMC has been a leader when we were able to get guidance documents and settle reform. Thank you.
Mr. Weed?
So as the only candidate in this race that has owned and operated his own business successfully for almost 30 years, I have real-world experience. And right now what we have, and before the Supreme Court made the decision, is we have agencies that are running the show. These are Ivy Leagues. These are people that are running these agencies in Washington that have no real-world experience at all. They're operating off of theory and off of, just things that they learned in the classroom. And ultimately, that's why we had the issue. They were making their own decisions and judgment. These are things that need to be legislated. These are things that need to be hashed out in Congress. And we need to absolutely be, in charge of legislating and having good, dispassionate debate about the issues within the agencies. And that's why I'm a big believer in auditing each of the agencies, understanding what's going on with their budgets, who's working there. Do they have, again, real-world experience? Do they have, offices that aren't being used? Do they, what is their budget? And understanding exactly what's going on. We cannot have the agencies making the decisions. This needs to be done in Congress. And I'll be a leader in that, bringing common sense to Congress. There are others that have good common sense, and really it's a team sport in Congress. You have to work together with people to find solutions to the problems. And I have a history of spending my time attacking problems. And these are things that we have to do in Congress, and I will be a fighter for that.
Senator Jacques, this question will go to you first. Most economists' research suggests that tariffs are ultimately paid for by higher prices for consumers. However, we know that China is engaged in widespread and state-sponsored corporate espionage and theft of intellectual property, in addition to their aggressive geopolitical ambitions. How would you balance supporting trade that benefits both the U.S. and our international partners while protecting our national security and our corporate trade secrets?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question in the background that you described. I'm actually the author of the legislation to stop not just China, but all of our foreign adversaries from being able to purchase farmland here in the state of Wisconsin. That's absolutely something that I would support at the federal level as well, which I know is under discussion. I do support the free market. I've been endorsed by Associated Builders and Contractors, which are basically the defenders of the free market. They're the merit shop folks, and there's a clear contrast in this race, which is why I've been endorsed. But I also believe in fair trade, and certainly, as you had mentioned, China is not playing fair, whether that's in intellectual property or the way that their government, especially with everything actually being tracked to the Chinese military. That's one of the reasons why I've offered legislation to restrict investments of State of Wisconsin Investment Board funds in Chinese companies. So I certainly support the stance that President Trump has outlined in terms of making sure that we are looking out for U.S. interests and protecting U.S. supply chains as well as our intellectual property.
Mr. Weed, same question to you.
So as the only candidate in this race endorsed by President Trump, he knows how to negotiate, because when you're in business for yourself, when you're the owner-operator, you have to learn how to negotiate good deals. President Trump is a great deal maker. And when you're dealing with fair trade and things around the world, especially with folks that are our adversaries, let's just look at someone like China. I think tariffs can be used, and it's good to use occasionally for negotiation purposes. I'm hearing, I was at a foundry right in our district and talking to them, and they're talking about dumping, issues that they're dealing with from China, where they're actually hurting the manufacturer with their unfair trade practices. President Trump, and I'm aligned with him on this, we need to protect American jobs. We need to bring jobs back here to the United States and get to a fair playing field. But that only comes from strength and leadership, and that's what President Trump delivers. And I'll bring that same common sense to Washington and Congress. We need to strike deals with people. You need to use leverage when you're negotiating to make sure that folks are listening and you can actually negotiate a fair deal. But ultimately, we need to protect jobs. We need to bring jobs back here and take care of the manufacturers and the businesses in our country.
Senator Roth.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to correct something that was said earlier. I own a business here in Northeast Wisconsin, been a home builder for 25 years. My wife and I own and operate a home building business that has built houses for very happy customers, helping them achieve their version of the American dream all over Northeast Wisconsin. When it comes to trade, at the end of the day, we've been sold a raw end of the deal by our politicians out in Washington for years. A lot of it in my lifetime, I remember NAFTA. I remember being a young child here when that was working its way through Congress. I remember driving down Richmond Street in Appleton, Wisconsin, and there used to be a company there called Zwicker Knitting Mills. And it went out of business. After NAFTA was passed, it went out of business. Actually, it didn't go out of the business. The business itself moved south of the border. It moved down to Mexico. And so we need people out in Washington who are willing to put American workers, American consumers, and American businesses first. And I think that's what I bring to this table, having a unique skill set and experience across all of these platforms to go out to Washington and be able to lead on that. And tariffs, let's just remember that they are a tool, but they are also a tax. They're a tax on you, the consumer. And I toured a vegetable processor here in Northeast Wisconsin, that because of the steel tariff, I don't know if it shocked me, maybe would shock you too, the majority of our canned food in the United States now this year, first time ever that a majority of our food has been imported our canned food. This is food security is a national security issue, and this is because of the steel tariffs. It's cheaper now for them to buy our green beans and ship them from places like Egypt than to grow them here. So we're losing agriculture, losing canneries here in the United States. My point in saying that is we have to be very careful how we apply those, because they have consequences for American workers and American businesses.
Speaking of competing with China, businesses used to be able to deduct research and development R&D expenses in the same year that they were incurred. Beginning in 2022, businesses were forced to amortize R&D expenses over a 5-year period, which disincentivizes U.S. companies from investing in innovation, thus putting U.S. companies at a disadvantage to foreign competitors, particularly ones in China. Do you support restoring the ability of businesses to deduct the R&D tax credit, the R&D expenses in the year that they were incurred? And we'll start with Tony.
Yes, I do. I think we need to incentivize businesses and employers in our district and throughout the United States. I think these rules, I don't know where they come from, but these clearly are people that don't have real-world experience. Businesses are struggling. They have such a high tax rate right now. It's very difficult to find good team members to work at their locations and at their businesses. We need to find additional ways. Not only that, but we need to find additional ways for companies and businesses to grow, and more tax incentives. And so I will be an advocate for our businesses. That's the driver of our economy here in District 8, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in agriculture, all the different businesses that are throughout here. I will be passionate about reducing the tax burden, allowing for more incentives to grow, to hire people. And that is just, again, more red tape, more bureaucracy. These are theories that are done with our agency state that are coming into play. And that's why we need people with real-world experience to go to Washington and truly help businesses.
Roger?
I would absolutely be in favor of allowing them to expense that in the year that it's incurred. You know, again, the United States, just look at all the products that we use as consumers, whether it be smartphones, digital technology. Like, this was all developed in the United States. Most of this was because of research and development by corporations, and it's a risk that they take. This isn't a guarantee. When they go out there with this new idea, it's a risk, and it's not really a reward by allowing them to take it all up front, but it certainly helps them, and it helps encourage them to continue to take those risks, to make those investments in the American worker, in the American economy. So I will do everything in my power, as I mentioned earlier, taxation and regulation. That is how we make American companies competitive with those around the world. We've got great workers, we've got great entrepreneurs. Now let's just get a tax and regulatory environment that can work with that to make sure that in the 21st century that we are still is competitive in coming out with those new generative kind of products as we had in the past.
Andre?
Yes, absolutely. We need to incentivize anything that is going to allow for additional economic growth, and particularly if we can accomplish that by allowing people to keep more of their own money. I think ultimately it's the consumer that pays when we impose higher costs. So I think the extent to which, you know, again, we can offer any sort of tax incentives, especially for our domestic companies, I think that's critical, yes.
Senator Roth, this question will go to you first. Research shows that Wisconsin has the 5th highest hospital costs in the country. Too often, legislators address high costs by introducing health insurance mandate bills that increase costs even more for employers and their employees. What actions in Congress would you take to bring down health care costs?
Well, I mentioned one of them on the onset, but I mean, for a business, healthcare costs are one of their biggest line items. And unfortunately, everything that's been done at the federal government level has only added to the cost of healthcare. It's actually driven down, it's increased the cost and driven down the care. And what we see here in Wisconsin is that in many areas, in rural areas, hospitals and clinics are closing. And this is all because of policy at the federal government level. So I would incentivize, you know, the states at the, you know, let's not pass more burdensome regulations at the states, at the Fed level. Let's trust the states and let's trust the employers themselves. You know, a healthy workforce for a business means a better bottom line. I was just touring a business here in Brown County, and I walked in there and there were a couple of employees waiting to go in. They had an on-site nurse. And I was talking with the president of the company about that, and he just walked me through how important that was, how important healthcare was to them, because solving these issues for them on the front end, it means less time recovering from these injuries and more productivity. So I will go out to Congress and work to reduce the regulation, the federal regulation, trust and empower the states. And we've got to do in 2017, Senator McCain, in spite to President Trump, gave him the thumbs down on the bill, which would have brought some of these necessary and needed reforms to make healthcare more competitive here in the United States. And we need to bring those back, many of those provisions back, like the one I mentioned to you earlier, and help out our employers, and I will do that.
Senator Jacques.
Yeah, so I think my legislative record shows that I am very strongly against unfunded mandates or underfunded mandates. I think if you're looking at government mandating something, it should pay for it. So, no, there shouldn't be, well, there was legislation that Senator Vukmir had brought forward at the state level that I was very supportive of in terms of requiring reports before there would be any new healthcare mandates at the state level. But the under-reimbursement of providers is a hidden tax on all of us. And I think, especially when we look at Obamacare, which needs to go in the form that it was imposed, because look at all the mandates. And frankly, outside of that, Medicaid. When you have states sign on the dotted line, unfortunately, we are crippling our providers and, frankly, providing substandard care or access to a number of individuals who can't accept those rates. I mean, when Obamacare was basically enacted, we didn't get the Cornhusker kickback or the Louisiana Purchase, if you remember those side deals that were used just to get that over the finish line. So yeah, Obamacare has been a disaster, and I think Wisconsin has showed how you can do health care right without basically the harmful intervention of the federal government.
Mr. Weed?
I think we need to look from a healthcare perspective in decentralizing what's going on in the markets right now. We're seeing health care companies continue to merge. And what's happening there, and we see it, whenever there is less competition, you're going to continue to have higher prices. And that's a big concern for me. So we need to dig into that. We need more competitiveness. We need fair markets, and that will drive prices down. And right now, what we have with the Biden administration is, they're looking to have Medicare and health care for all, a socialized medicine, and we just cannot afford that. Kamala Harris has came out and said that she's against private insurance. And so there's a lot at stake at this point. But again, I think we need to get back to, competitive markets, continue to decentralize, and ultimately drive costs down.
So this will be the final question, and we'll start with you, Senator Jacques. Vice President Kamala Harris and others on the left have advocated for eliminating employer-sponsored health care and turning America into a single-payer system, as Mr. Weed just said. Some on the right, including some of your future colleagues, have argued for taxing employer-provided health care. Do you agree with either of these policies, and what will you do to strengthen employer-sponsored health care in Congress?
Yeah, I think we need to do everything that we can to protect employer-sponsored health care. In many cases, that's a critical tool in being able to keep workforce. But I think, yes, I've seen the clips of Kamala Harris talking about how, yes, we are going to eliminate the ability for you to keep your own employer-sponsored health plan. And to me, that's just ridiculous, but that shows how far left we've lurched, especially under Kamala Harris and the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. So I do not support those proposals. I am very much against the universal health care and the additional costs that I think it would wreak on the average American family. So, yeah, opposed. Thank you.
Mr. Weed?
No, I would not be in favor of that. I think ultimately what we need to find in healthcare right now is transparency as well. Along with decentralizing, as long as transparency to me is a big issue. You look, people that go to the hospital right now, they get the care that they need. They come home and they'll get 4 or 5 bills, and 6 weeks later, and we don't know what things cost. And I think there is a major issue, certainly in our healthcare system right now. So we cannot move towards socialized medicine. We can't afford it. We see the ill effects of that around the country. And again, I'm always going to lean towards, and especially being in business for myself, for markets and for competition. And I think that's where we need to continue to lean.
Senator Roth?
Yeah, I would not support either of those proposals. When you look at healthcare, and we touched on it a little bit before, every time government gets involved, what happens is exactly the opposite of what they were intending to do. So they want to try and make it more affordable, it costs more. They want to try and increase access, hospitals are shutting down. The American health system, for all of its faults, and I'm not here telling you that it's perfect, but it still is the envy of the world. I had a brother who suffered from a cancer several years back, And, you know, our health plan that my family was under, it meant that he had to go to this particular place. My dad said, I want to know where can I go to get the best result here. And it was a university hospital outside of Wisconsin. And we went there and, you know, had it done quite successfully and everything was wonderful. But what was astounding to me was that one of the princes of Saudi Arabia was in that very hospital room that my brother was in before he got there. My point being that wherever you are in the world, this is where you want to come because we have the innovation. We haven't killed that yet, but they're trying to. That's what Kamala Harris will do if she's able to bring this about. But we haven't yet killed the innovation in the ability of our healthcare system and in all of those tangentially aligned to it to invest that into trying to find the next greatest cure. And I will make sure and fight with my dying breath to make sure that the United States is still that place that people want to come to receive that top quality care. And to that end, there is work that needs to be done, and we've talked about that a little bit, but part of that is getting government out of the way of free enterprise.
Very good. It is now time for closing statements. The order was chosen by cards backstage, and we'll go with Andre Jacques.
Well, thank you, Kurt, Scott, Rachel. I've enjoyed working with each of you on any number of legislative initiatives over the years. I appreciate you providing this forum today. I'd like to thank our audience for coming out today and the media partners. I think it's critical that we elect proven conservatives to Congress because otherwise we're never going to get anywhere. Anybody can tell you what you want to hear at election time. You have to look at those who've shown through their record that they actually mean it, because there are very few that actually can stand up to the pressure and the fire, and especially the party bosses. Whether somebody has been part of the establishment or looking to join it, it's clear I'm the one that's been looking to fight it. And I've been tired of having to, at the state level, try to treat the symptoms of the problems coming out of that cesspool in Washington, D.C., whether that is inflation or the border. It's critical that we don't just elect from conservative seats like this one people with an R after their name. We actually need to deliver on the promises. Again, I'm proud to be the proven conservative fighter. I'm proud to be the candidate supported by those concerned most about public safety and law enforcement. I'm very proud of my record, and I would love to have the support of each and every one of you in this room here today. So again, I would like to thank the opportunity to speak more directly on some of the economic issues facing our state, facing our nation, but it's critical that we address both the fiscal and the social issues, because really everything is a moral issue, from our tax code to our criminal justice system, and it's critical that we address them correctly. Thank you.
Roger Roth, 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, WMC, for hosting this debate. Thank you all for coming here. Again, I am Roger Roth. I'm running for Congress here in Northeast Wisconsin, and I'm looking forward to taking my experience, 25 years home building and small business, 20 years in the military with 4 deployments overseas, and my time working with Governor Scott Walker in the state legislature out to Washington to work with President Trump to get this country moving in the right direction. And if you look at the future of the Republican Party, it's changed. I mean, just look at that wonderful convention we had last week. I was able to get down there and be a part of that. We are now the party of the working man and woman. We are the party of the Americans who actually work for a living with their hands, building, the ones who are defending our streets, building our products, protecting our nation. And I am uniquely qualified to go out there and lead for them because that's exactly who I am. My entire life, blue collar, home building here in Northeast Wisconsin, and I'm looking forward to going out to Washington and leading on these important issues because the timing couldn't be more stark. With the way the Democrats want to take this nation, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, we can't afford 4 more years of their failed policies. And we need a proven conservative fighter who's actually delivered results, been in the trenches, obtain the bloody scars, worked with Governor Scott Walker to bring about the civil service reform here in our state, the right to work law here in our state, worked hard to help our businesses with wetland reform. I've done it, which is how you know when I go to Washington, I won't abandon you. I will do what I always have done, which is to work for you, the people who would elect me here in Northeast Wisconsin. I look forward to earning your support, and I ask for your vote on August 13th. Thank you.
And finally, Tony Weed.
Well, thank you, Rachel, Kurt, Scott, WMC, and each and every one of you for being here today. You know, it's my great honor to be able to be in this position. You know, after a career of owning our own businesses, my wife and I, and raising our 4 children who are now adults, my wife and I have done everything together. We know what it's like to run a small business with no safety net, what it's like to sign the fronts of paychecks day in and day out, to take out loans, to work hard, to have the grit, determination, and hard work of making it work. And it's very important that we have people in Washington that are not career politicians. We need people that are actually there to serve. I'm not here to be a politician. I am here to truly represent each and every one of you in District 8. And I think the Founding Fathers intended for there not to be career politicians, and that it should not be a career. You know, you should be working in your farm, or maybe you're a teacher or a doctor or something like that, and then go serve in Washington for a short period of time, and then you should come back home. And my pledge to you is I will serve each and every one of you as your representative, and then when I'm done, I will come back home and go back to the private sector. This is where I belong, right here in Green Bay. And so it's an honor to be here. I ask you for your vote. I've spent my life hiring people and leading and coaching folks, and now I'm on the other side of the table. And I'm asking for you to hire me to be your representative, and I will work hard day and night to make sure that I do everything in your best interests. So thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate each and every one of you.
Very good. We are out of time. I want to thank the candidates for participating in a respectful and substantive debate on business issues. I also want to thank Scott Manley and Rachel Vervelde. Special thanks to all of you in the audience, either here in the building or at home watching this. Big shout out to the Greater Green Bay Chamber of Commerce for providing a Chamber of Commerce Day for a Chamber of Commerce debate, so thank you for that. Please be sure to vote on August 13th in the Wisconsin primary election, and thank you for coming again.